The man beside my wife leaned over the courtroom rail and whispered something into her ear. Then she looked at me with pure disgust and said, "Don't embarrass us." Today, I didn't react. I just sat there quietly with my hands folded while the judge flipped through a file that made his face go pale 3 minutes later. He looked directly at my wife and said, "Ma'am, you have no idea who your husband really is." The entire room went silent. Even the bailiff stopped moving. I still remember the sound of my wife's breath catching in her throat when the judge said those words, because until that moment she thought I was just an old man. She could destroy my name as Daniel Hayes. I'm 62 years old, and for most of my life, I worked in places where people lied for a living. 27 years with the Federal Financial Crimes Division taught me something important. The most dangerous people don't look dangerous. They look normal. They smile at dinner. They hold your hand in public. They say, "I love you." While they're already planning your funeral, I learned that lesson the hard way the day my own wife tried to take everything from me. Started like any other Tuesday morning rain, hitting the windows, coffee getting cold beside me, while I sat at the kitchen table looking over property documents for our lake house. My wife, Vanessa, walked into the room. Without saying good morning, she looked perfect. As always, expensive hair, perfect makeup, silk blouse that cost more than most people's monthly car payments, but her eyes were different, cold, distant, almost impatient. She set a stack of papers in front of me and said, "Sign them." I didn't touch the papers. I just looked at her and asked what they were. Divorce documents. She said it like she was asking me to pass the salt. No emotion, no hesitation. 24 years of marriage. And she couldn't even look me in the eyes when she said it. I stayed quiet. That's what confused her. Most people think silence means weakness, but after spending decades interrogating fraudsters and watching criminals panic in courtrooms, I learned something: silence makes people reveal themselves. So I just sat there watching her. Then she made a mistake that changed everything. She smiled, not a sad smile, not a regretful one, a confident smile, like someone who already knew they had won. That was a moment I knew there was someone else. I asked her one question: how long? She didn't answer directly. She just looked out the window and said, "You've been distant for years." Daniel. That's when I saw the man's reflection in her phone screen, a text message with a heart emoji and the name Richard I. Didn't react. I didn't even blink. I just signed the papers, closed my pen, and told her I hoped she found what she was looking for. She looked shocked, almost disappointed, like she expected me to beg her to stay. But I'd seen too many people lose their dignity trying to hold on to someone who already left the room. Long ago, 3 days later, I found out who Richard was. His full name was Richard Vale, 51 years old, private investment consultant. Except men like him never really work alone. They float around wealthy women like sharks around blood. I'd seen his type before: charming, expensive suits, fake confidence, and just enough intelligence to hide their tracks. What interested me most was how fast he moved into my life. The same week my wife filed for divorce, he was already staying in our lake house. That wasn't love. That was a plan. I started digging quietly: old contacts, old databases, old friends who still owed me favors. And the more I looked, the worse it got. Richard Vale didn't exist before 8 years ago. His real name was Richard Vance, and he'd been connected to 3 financial fraud investigations in 2 states. None of them stuck. No convictions, no prison time, just ruined men, divorces, disappearing assets, and bank accounts that emptied overnight. I sat in my office until 2 in the morning staring at the files, trying to understand how my wife got mixed up with someone like him. Then my phone rang. It was my son, Ethan. His voice sounded strange, tight, nervous. "Dad, I think you need to come over right now." I asked him what was wrong. There was a long silence before he spoke again. "MOM, just sold your watch collection to some guy I've never seen before, and Richard is here talking about moving money overseas." That's when I realized this was never just a divorce. And as I stood there staring at the dark window of my office, I understood something chilling. My wife didn't just want to leave me. Someone was trying to erase me completely. I drove to the lake house without calling anyone. The roads were empty and dark. Rain slid across the windshield in long silver lines. And the entire drive, I kept thinking about one thing: people don't move money that fast unless they're afraid of time. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw 3 cars outside. One of them was a black Mercedes registered to a shell company in Nevada. I recognized the trick immediately. Rich men hide assets that way. Criminals hide identities that way. I didn't go inside right away. I stayed in the car watching the windows. After 10 minutes, I saw my wife walk past the dining room, holding a stack of files, and Richard appeared behind her, talking fast, waving his hands like someone under pressure. I kept watching them. My son, Ethan, stepped into view, and that's when things changed. He looked terrified. I hadn't seen that look on my son's face since he was 12 years old. The night 2 federal agents showed up at our house after a witness threatened our family during one of my cases. Ethan opened the front door before I could knock. "Dad, you should have called," he whispered. I looked past him into the house. Richard was sitting at my dining table drinking from a glass of my 20-year scotch like he owned the place. My wife didn't even stand up when I walked in. She just crossed her arms and said, "You don't live here anymore." I stayed calm. That made Richard nervous. Men like him expect anger. They know how to manipulate anger, but calm silence makes him uncomfortable. I Looked at the files on the table: international transfer documents, property liquidation, forms, closed account summaries. They weren't just dividing assets, they were stripping everything clean. I asked one question. Whose idea was it? My wife looked at Richard before answering. That told me everything. I needed to know. Richard stood up smiling like he thought he was the smartest man in the room. Daniel, you're a retired old man. Now, this doesn't have to get ugly. I looked directly at him and said, men who say that usually know it's already ugly. The room went quiet again. Ethan kept looking between us like he was waiting for something to explode. Then my wife made another mistake. She told Ethan to go upstairs. The second he left the room, her entire face changed, colder, harder, more impatient. Daniel, just sign everything and walk away. You'll still have enough money to live comfortably. I actually laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because it was so obvious. Now this wasn't about love or happiness. It was about control. Someone had convinced her I was already beaten. I picked up one of the files and saw a bank name I recognized: Cayman Islands Private Holdings. That bank had appeared in 3 of my old fraud investigations 15 years ago. My stomach turned cold. I set the paper down slowly and looked at Richard. You're not just stealing from me, are you? His smile disappeared for half a second, just half a second. But that was enough. Men who lie for a living always react to the truth before they hide it. I left the house without saying another word. But the second I got into my car, I called an old friend, Martin Greaves, retired FBI Cyber Division, one of the best financial trackers I ever worked with. He answered on the second ring. Danny, I haven't heard from you in years. I told him I needed a favor. His voice changed immediately. Serious, calm, professional. Send me everything you have by midnight. Martin, call me back. You were right about Richard, but you're missing the bigger picture. My chest tightened. What bigger picture? There was silence for a moment. Then Martin said, your wife isn't the first woman he's used. He targets married women with access to old money. He builds trust, pushes divorce, moves assets offshore, then disappears. Before anyone realizes what happened, I asked how. Many women, 3 confirmed, maybe more. 2 ex-husbands ended up bankrupt. 1 shot himself. After losing everything, I felt something shift inside me, not anger, something colder than that, clarity. I sat alone in my office looking at photos of my family from years ago, Christmas vacations, birthdays, anniversaries. And the whole time I kept asking myself the same question. When did my wife stop being my wife? The next morning, Ethan showed up at my house without warning. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept. Adam, OM, and Richard are selling more things. They want access to the trust too. I asked him if his mother knew about Richard's past. He shook his head. No, she thinks he loves her. That word hit me harder than I expected. Love people destroy their entire lives for that word. Ethan sat across from me, rubbing his hands together. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. I heard Richard on the phone last night. He said, if you start asking questions, they'll handle you the same way they handle the other one. I looked up slowly. What other one? Ethan swallowed hard. I don't know. But he said it right after talking about life insurance. That's when everything changed. This was no longer about divorce or money anymore. And as I stare at my son's shaking hands, I realized something far worse than betrayal might already be happening inside my own family. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my office with the lights off, listening to the sound of the clock on the wall and reading every file Martin sent me. The deeper I dug, the darker it got. Richard Vance had changed his name twice, used 6 different business identities, and moved through 3 states, leaving ruin behind him everywhere. He went divorces, dead accounts, disappearing investments, and men who somehow lost everything right before they died. One case stood out: a real estate developer from Arizona, 60 years old, healthy, successful, happily married. 6 months after his wife met Richard, the man drowned during a solo boating trip off Lake Mead. No witnesses, no investigation, just a tragic accident. I kept staring at the photo of that man because something about his eyes felt familiar, the same trust one used to have. When I looked at my own wife, that's when I understood the real con. These men never stole money. First, they stole trust. One called Martin again at 4:30 in the morning and asked him one question. Can you prove Richard was connected to the developer's death? There was a long silence before he answered, not yet. But I found something else. Your wife recently took out a $12 million life insurance policy on you. My hand froze around the phone. When I asked when she did, his answer made my stomach turn. 3 weeks ago. That was before the divorce papers, before the arguments, before Richard moved into the lake house. They were planning something long before ever suspected it. I stood up, walked to the window, and watched the sun start rising over the trees. Then I made a decision. I was done watching now. I was going to hunt. I spent the next 2 days building a case the same way I did during my federal years, quietly, carefully, without emotion. Martin tracked offshore accounts, while I contacted a retired prosecutor named Ellen Price, one of the sharpest legal minds I ever knew. She listened to everything without interrupting, then said something that stuck with me. Daniel, people like this only make one mistake. They get greedy. That's when we catch them. The plan came together fast. I let my wife believe I was breaking down. I stopped answering certain calls. I acted distracted, tired, confused, exactly the way they wanted me to look. Then I did something deliberate. I told Vanessa I was ready to sign over full control of the family trust. but only in person at the cabin. She agreed too quickly. That told me they were desperate. When the day arrived, I got there early and set everything up: microphones, cameras, bank records, insurance files, and copies of every fraud report connected to Richard Vance. Ellen sat in the back room with two federal agents waiting for my signal. Ethan wanted to be there, but I refused. He'd already seen enough damage. Inside this family, the snow was falling hard outside. When Vanessa and Richard finally arrived, I still remember the sound of their footsteps on the wood floor, slow, confident, like they thought the game was over. My wife walked in first, wearing the same silver coat she wore the night we celebrated our 20th anniversary. That hurt more than I expected. Richard followed her, carrying a leather briefcase. He smiled the second he saw me alone, ready to do the right thing. Daniel, he asked. I just nodded slowly and motioned for them to sit down. Then I slid the trust documents across the table. Vanessa didn't even read them. She reached for the pen, immediately agreed. Makes people careless, right? Before she signed, I asked one question. Do you ever love me? Her hand stopped for half a second, but Richard answered for her. Does it matter now? I looked directly into his eyes and said it matters. To the FBI agents listening in the next room, his entire face changed. Vanessa looked confused. What are you talking about? I opened the briefcase beside me and pulled out the files, photos, bank transfers, life insurance documents, recordings, everything Martin found. I watched the color drain from Richard's face as I slid a photo of the dead developer across the table. You used the same bank, the same insurance method, and the same offshore accounts every time, I said. Quietly, Vanessa looked at Richard like she was seeing him for the first time. What is he talking about? She whispered. Richard stood up fast enough to knock his chair over. This is insane, he snapped, but men only panic like that when they know the truth is closing, and I stayed calm. That was the worst part for him. I never raised my voice, never lost control. I just kept talking away. I did in every interrogation room for 27 years, and I played the recording Ethan secretly recorded from the lake house. Richard's voice filled the room. If the old man starts digging, we handle him the same way we handle the other one. Vanessa looked like she couldn't breathe. She turned toward him, shaking. Tell me that's not true. But Richard didn't answer, because at that exact moment, the back door opened and two federal agents walked into the room, and the look on Richard's face told me he finally understood the trap had already closed around him. The room went dead silent the second the federal agent stepped inside. Richard's eyes moved rapidly from the badges to the files spread across the table, then to the windows, like he was calculating escape routes. Men like him always think there's one more way out. Vanessa looked completely lost, her hands shaking, her face pale, as she stared at the man she thought she loved for the first time in 24 years. I looked at my wife and didn't recognize her anymore. The confident woman who handed me divorce papers in my kitchen was gone now. She looked terrified. Richard tried to recover fast. This is a misunderstanding, he said, forcing a smile, but his voice cracked slightly when the agents opened the briefcase he was carrying and placed several printed photos on the table: bank transfers, insurance claims, passport records, and security footage from 3 different states. The agent looked directly at Richard. We've been tracking you for 11 months, Mr. Vance. Your mistake was getting greedy. Again, Vanessa turned toward him slowly. Your name isn't even Richard. Is it? He didn't answer. That was the moment everything finally shattered inside her. I could see it in her eyes, the realization, the fear, the humiliation. She looked at me like she wanted me to say this was all a lie, but I couldn't do that, not anymore. Richard suddenly pushed his chair back hard enough to hit the floor and ran for the side door. He only made it 3 steps before the second agent slammed him against the wall. The sound echoed to the cabin. Vanessa screamed. Ethan, who had been waiting upstairs, rushed down the stairs, too late to miss any of it. My son stopped halfway down when he saw his mother crying and Richard in handcuffs. Dad, what the hell is happening? His voice sounded small again, like the little boy who used to hide behind me during thunderstorms. I looked at him and realized something painful. Children never really expect their parents to become strangers. I told him truth, all but the fraud, the insurance policy, the dead men in other states, the offshore accounts. Every word hit the room like a hammer. Vanessa kept shaking her head over and over, saying no, 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 like denial could somehow erase what she'd done. Then she looked at Richard one last time and asked the question that finally broke her. Did you ever love me? He laughed, not a big laugh, not some movie villain moment, just a quiet, dismissive little laugh. Like the answer was obvious. That sound changed everything in her face. She collapsed in the chair, covering her mouth as if she might be sick. I didn't feel victory watching her. I thought I would, but I didn't. I just felt tired. The kind of tired that comes when someone you trusted for half your life finally shows you who they really are. The agents took Richard outside into the snow while Ellen started speaking quietly to Vanessa about cooperation agreements and financial charges. I walked out onto the porch alone. Cold air hit my face hard. The snow was falling thicker, now covering the trees, the driveway, the footprints. Everything looked clean again. Ethan followed me outside. After a few minutes, we stood there in silence. Before he finally spoke, did Mom know about the other men? I took a long breath before answering. I don't think she wanted to know. Sometimes people fall so deep into a lie They start defending it even from themselves. Ethan looked down at the snow, then asked a question I think he'd been holding inside all night. How did you stay so calm? I looked out into the dark trees and thought about all the years I spent chasing criminals, all the interrogations, all the courtrooms, all the men who thought they were smarter than everyone else. Then I looked at my son and said, because the second you let anger control you, people like him already win. He nodded slowly like he finally understood. Inside the cabin, I could hear Vanessa sobbing softly, but I didn't go back, and some things can't be fixed with one conversation. Some things break. Two, completely. Richard Vance was later connected to multiple fraud cases across 4 states, including the death of the Arizona developer. The investigation lasted nearly a year. Vanessa avoided prison by cooperating, but she lost everything: the houses, the accounts, the reputation. Even most of her friends disappeared once the story hit the news. I haven't spoken to her in 11 months. Sometimes I still think about the woman. I married the woman before all the lies, before the greed, before the stranger she became. And honestly, that's the hardest part. Not the betrayal, not the money, not even the threat. It's realizing the person you loved may have disappeared long before you notice. These days, I spend most mornings fishing with Ethan at the small lake near my house. Life is quieter now, simpler, peaceful. Sometimes he asks me if I regret staying calm through everything, and every time I give him the same answer: no, because silence didn't make me weak. It gave me time to see the truth, and the truth eventually destroys people who spend their entire lives running from it.